Hello everybody and welcome to your penultimate literacy lesson of the week. Now I've been really excited about today's lesson because we're going to begin writing the story of Alma, and I know that many of you will have lots of unique ideas. Now the first thing I'd ask you to do before writing today's date and what is to go back, if you haven't already, to the main homepage where you found the link to this lesson and re-watch the video of Alma up to the point where she signs her name on the blackboard. So up to this point here, because it's essential that you're familiar with this part of the story before we write today. Once you've done that, you should then write today's date, which is Thursday the 4th of February, and our learning objective. That is, we are learning to use figurative and descriptive language to convey, that means to show, setting and character. Figurative language is language that doesn't have its literal meaning. So, for example, idioms are figurative language, as are personification. Personification is also a type of figurative language, as are similes and metaphors. It's the kind of language that goes beyond the literal meaning of words to get a message or a point across. And I know lots of you are really familiar with using it from year 5. Descriptive language are techniques such as expanded noun phrases that we would expect to see in your writing, and it's really essential that you can include some of these so that you can convey or you can create a picture in the reader's mind. Your reader should be able to understand what's happening, what the atmosphere was like, what the setting's like, what the character's like, without even watching the video. If you've written effectively, they should be able to picture these scenes in their mind, and that's what we're going to try and do today. So let's start then. On the left hand side you will see that I have snapped some images from the video to help me with the structure, and because I don't want to miss any parts out. So I know that initially the story begins in a little small French town or village, and I can see from my image here that it's really quite snowy. So my first step really is going to be describing the setting. Now these steps are just to guide you, so you might decide not to start with this part here. You might jump in straight away at this point, but it is essential that you're using your figurative and descriptive language to create an image. Here I can see that Alma is skipping down the street. So it's at this point, once I've introduced the setting, that I think I'm going to introduce the character. So let's start telling the story of Alma then. How might I start? Well, it looks like it's during the day, so I'm going to start by saying one November day, I think. So how might I describe that November day? It's not dull or it's not damp. It looks like a crisp day. That means quite cold. So I'm going to say one crisp November day. One crisp November day. November needs a capital N because it's the name of the month. The villagers of I'm going to call this French town Clarent because that's the name of a French town, but you could make up a name of, or you could say a different name of a French town. However, it would have to be a real name, otherwise your story would lack credibility. So one crisp November day, the villagers of the quaint town of Clarent, I'm going to say. The quaint town of Clarent. Quaint means a little bit unusual, and I've chosen the word quaint to describe the town of Clarent because I think it's quite unusual that there was a toy shop with no owner in there with lots of dolls that resembled the faces of children. So that's why I've chosen that word, to already get the reader thinking that something more unusual could happen later on. So let's continue. One crisp November day, the villagers of the quaint town of Clarent, I want to say here that they awoke to snow. So how could I phrase that more descriptively? Well, it doesn't actually look like a lot of snow, so instead of just saying awoke to heaps of snow, I'm going to say awoke to a fine dusting dusting, and I'm going to describe that further by saying icing sugar snow. A fine dusting of icing sugar snow. Or you might, not show myself the snow. Or you might say the roofs of the houses were covered in snow. You can use the picture to help you describe as well. Okay, I'm going to give a little bit more information now about the weather to build the atmosphere slightly. The light flakes, so I mean the light flakes of snow, I could say fell to the ground, but I'm going to use personification here, and I'm going to say they danced and whirled slowly downwards. Slowly downwards from the sky. Landing silently on the cold, frosty ground. You can see I'm using lots of descriptive language here so the reader can imagine just what it was like that day in Claremont. I want to make sure my atmosphere is building up and I'm creating that picture in the reader's mind. On the cold, frosty ground. Let's read that back and see if I've effectively conveyed the setting. One crisp November morning, or one crisp November day. The villagers of the quaint town, as I said, it means unusual, the quaint town of Claremont, awoke to a fine dusting of icing sugar snow. The light flakes danced and whirled, some use of personification there, slowly downwards from the sky, landing silently on the cold, frosty ground. So already I think the reader is going to be quite intrigued. I haven't given too much away at this point. Now it's time to introduce my character, and I'm going to do this in a different colour so it's really, really clear for you. What I'd really love to see today is us avoiding using she too much at the beginning of our sentences. I really want you to focus on starting your sentences in lots of different ways. So you can see here I started with a when, which was the one crisp November day. So I'm not going to start with another adverbial here. I want to add variation. So I'm going to say, through the streets skipped a little girl. So that's almost like a where starter. Through the streets, or through the town streets. What word could I put in front of streets to make it even more effective? Yes, I could say through the town's narrow streets, absolutely, because you can see that from the picture. And if I include the word narrow, then the reader might think it's even stranger that a little girl is skipping along there on her own. So I'm going to say through the town's snowy alleyways and narrow streets, snowy alleyways and narrow streets, narrow streets, comma, that's an adverbial. A where adverbial opener. It's telling me where she was. She was through the town's snowy alleyways and narrow streets. Skipped a little girl. And there you can see in my picture is my little girl. Skipped a little girl. Okay, what else would I like to include now? What else is significant about the girl? Well, I want to describe her so the reader can imagine what she's like and how innocent I think she is, or can imagine how innocent she is. So I'm going to say, I could start by saying she wore a pale gilet, or she wore a hat on her head, or she wore a pink jacket. But I'm trying to avoid starting my sentences with she. So I'm going to actually start by saying her pink jacket pink jacket, or you could say her pale pink jacket. In fact, I'm going to add in the word, in fact, it's probably bright pink, isn't it? Her bright pink jacket was the colour of her rosy cheeks. That makes it seem like she's a happy little girl. Was the colour of her rosy cheeks, And I also want to say that she's wearing a little blue bobble hat too. Let me continue. Her pink jacket was the colour of her rosy cheeks and small button nose. Her pale, I've made this sentence a little bit too long. Let me just see how I can change this. Her pink jacket was the colour of her rosy cheeks, and her small button nose. What could I say about her small button nose? Yes, you could remark on the colour of it, or the fact that it looked like it had been exposed to the chilly weather for just a few minutes too long. So I'm going to say her pink jacket was the colour of her rosy cheeks, and her small button nose looked like it had been exposed. It had been exposed. That means it had been left out in, or it had been out in. It had been exposed to the chilly weather for a few minutes too long. That tells me it's red raw almost. Exposed to the chilly weather for just a few minutes too long. And the reason why I've included that in there, because it tells the reader that this girl has been out skipping in the snow for quite a long time. So it will get them wondering exactly what she's doing for just a few minutes too long. Now, I'm going to go back and reread that part of the paragraph, and see if I've used any effective language there. Through the town's snowy alleyways and narrow streets skipped a little girl. Her pink jacket, or her pale pink jacket, was the colour of her rosy cheeks, and her small button nose looked like it had been exposed to the chilly weather for just a few minutes too long. So lots of description in there to show what the character is really like. And you might also say on her hair, she wore a blue bobble hat. Or you might make reference to her short blonde hair. But really be careful, or big blue eyes perhaps. Be careful that you're not including unnecessary detail. We don't need a description of absolutely everything she is wearing. Only describe the parts of her that will help to create an effective image in the reader's mind. Okay? Now, we're going to move on to the next part of the story, and you can see what that's going to be about from the pictures. So, we know that as she trotted through the village, then she found a blackboard. So it's up to you how she was moving at this point. Before you even get to this point, you might give a little bit more information on this part to depict or to show just how happy she was. So you might say, as she trotted through the village, the snow crunched softly under her shoes, and her breath bloomed, making clouds of translucent white, which disappeared. I'm imagining, when you blow in the cold, you can see clouds of air coming from your mouth almost. Or you could even put a rhetorical question to add some suspense in there for the reader at this early stage. Where was everyone? You might also say that it's really important somewhere that you point out that the town was empty, and I actually don't think I've done that. Through the town's snowy alleyways, and I should have really said empty streets here. That's a better word than narrow, because I'm telling the reader at this early stage that there's nobody here, so it's more appropriate. Okay, so I'm going to say, while hopscotching down I can imagine she's probably hopscotching or while skipping down, but I've already used the word skipping. So I'm trying to get onto the blackboard part, but I need to tell the story and I need to move the time on. I am not starting with, she signed her name on a blackboard, because that's just a sentence. I need to link on. So, her nose has been exposed. Her nose looks like it's been exposed to the chilly weather for just a few minutes too long. Okay, she's in the snow. She spots the blackboard. When did she spot it? While she was skipping down the street. So I'm going to say, while hopscotching, so that I'm not using skipping again, while hopscotching, her way down, one silent, empty passage, or if I use narrow up there, or if I use an empty here, sorry, I wouldn't use empty again. So, empty passage, comma. What did she see? Well, I could say she saw, but even better would be she caught sight of. She caught sight of. She caught sight of a wall. Covered with names, or you could say scrawled, with names scrawled everywhere. Covered with names in different styles of handwriting, adding in that little bit of additional detail. In different styles of handwriting. Or I might actually say in varying styles of handwriting. Or you could just say a wall. She came across a wall. Scrawled on the wall were, and you could start with that instead. Let's read that back. While hopscotching her way down one silent empty passage, she caught sight of a wall covered with names in different styles of handwriting. Now, we're at the point she spotted the wall. What happens next? Well done. She signs her name on the wall. But I'm not going to start with saying she signed her name on the wall. And I'm really going to try and avoid using the word then. Okay? Because that doesn't give my reader enough information about how she was feeling at the time. And I really want you to try and stay away from the word then today. So instead, I'm going to say something about how she was feeling. So she's just seen this wall with lots of names. She probably even recognises some of the names on the wall. Some of them are probably even her friends' names. So I'm imagining she's seen these names and she just picks up the piece of chalk and almost signs her own name without thinking. So I could say without thinking, or another word for without thinking is impulsively. Impulsively grabbing a piece of chalk, that's an in clause in the middle of my sentence, impulsively grabbing a piece of chalk, needs to have a comma around it, she signed her own name. And I'm actually going to use a colon here for emphasis and for dramatic effect, Alma. And it's at that point we're going to stop. So once she signs her own name, we're going to stop. Now, we were working on many different things today, and one of the things, particularly at the beginning of this paragraph, that we worked on was using effective, figurative and descriptive language in order to convey the mood and the seriousness of the mood really, and the setting and the character. So you can see that I've underlined some of these in pink, and I'm really excited to see what words you come up with, or what descriptive language and figurative language you're able to include too. Now, let's read back my example once more then. One crisp November day, the villagers of the quaint town of Clarent awoke to a fine dusting of icing sugar snow. The light flakes danced and whirled slowly downwards from the sky, landing silently on the cold, frosty ground. Through the town's snowy alleyways and empty streets skipped a little girl. Her pink jacket was the colour of her rosy cheeks, and her small button nose looked like it had been exposed to the chilly weather for just a few minutes too long. So already the reader can imagine there's a little girl out by herself. She's quite innocent, she's all wrapped up, maybe sent out with her parents, but she's out there by herself and there doesn't seem to be many people around her. And at this part, you might also include, like I said earlier, the fact she's wearing a sky blue bobble hat, or her sort of khaki trousers, or her wispy blonde hair. So be careful about what detail you include at that point. And then she comes across the blackboard. While hopscotching her way down one silent, empty passage, I'm going to highlight silent, empty passage because that's descriptive language that will tell the reader or will show to the reader that this place is deserted and will create a little bit of suspense. She caught a sight of a wall covered with names in different styles of handwriting. And you could actually use repetition there for effect too with a short sentence. You could say, all different names, or names that looked familiar. Impulsively grabbing a chalk, she signed her own name, Alma. And as we know, signing her own name went on to become potentially the biggest mistake she could make. So please use these pictures to help you. You don't have to follow these steps exactly, but you do need to retell the story accurately so that it makes sense in the end. And we're only writing up to this part where she signs her name on the board, because tomorrow we're going to be looking at another technique, how to incorporate short, snappy sentences and repetition to build suspense up until the moment where she walks into the shop. Okay, I hope you have enjoyed today's lesson. Of course, you will have already watched it, hopefully, by the time you get to the end of it. This is our first day of writing the story, so please give it your best shot, and myself and all of your teachers are really looking forward to seeing your outstanding work on Seesaw. Good luck, everybody, and have a great rest of the day.